Welcome back to another episode of Mentored TV, where we are interviewing people that think out of the box, that have a critical eye on their own life and the lives outside of themselves, able to think by themselves, decide by themselves, and also perhaps bring some interesting thoughts and stimulation, i.e. mentoring, into other people's minds. Today, with me, I have Alan Friedman, a brand in itself, but let me quickly update you who Alan Friedman is. He is, I would say, one of the most renowned journalists, actually, not only in Europe, but also in the US. He is known for real expertise in economics as well as in politics. And of course, he's a veteran when it comes to the media business itself, a columnist, a speaker, an author of 10 books, amongst them an analysis of Silvio Berlusconi's life and also about the Agnelli family in Italy. And he transitioned very much from being a writing journalist to a TV journalist. And now I think if you just call him a journalist, is just not enough, because what he is a real analyst with so much depth and background and his own mind. So Alan, thank you so much for joining me here on Mentored TV. I can't wait to pick your brains about the COVID-19 crisis. And the objective of our conversation today is really to see COVID-19 from crisis to creation. What is going to happen to our old world? Is there going to be a brand new world, a new normal?
Thank you very much, Patricia. And indeed, we'll leave it to the stock market analysts and the daily analysts to worry about the ups and downs. And we'll leave it to those who govern us, who are, we hope, sometimes competent as well in some countries, to manage the crisis, and to business and financial thinkers. But it seems to me that what Mentored TV is trying to do here is to look a little bit beyond the day-to-day. And indeed, this is something I'm thinking about working on right now myself, because I believe that at this stage, I say sometimes to friends, what a pity it is that we happen to be living through what is undoubtedly going to be seen by history as the most traumatic experience for humanity since the Second World War. And then I say, but how interesting it is to live at a time when, in the space of maybe 12 to 18 months, our habits as a human race may change the way they would normally in a space of 10 to 20 years. Let me, if I may, explain what I mean by that. There are economic assumptions, and then there are social and cultural implications of what we're talking about. Let's start with the economic assumptions. From Goldman Sachs to IMF, everyone now understands that we are already in a global recession as a result of lockdown. We don't need to explain to the intelligent viewers of Mentored TV why that is, because everybody understands that when economic activity stops, there can be no economic activity. That's pretty obvious. But the implications of the economic recession go well beyond the economy. Let's remember that this, in the words of the IMF, will make the 2008-2009 financial crisis look small. It'll be a lot bigger. And, you know, headline writers are given to exaggeration, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that, sadly, the situation could be worse than the Great Depression between 1929 and 1939.
Yes.
A depression which lasted for really 10 years and only ended really because of the rearmament of the United States and other countries, the arms industry and everything that went with that, needed to fight Hitler and Japan. So that's a profound statement, but what do we mean by that? Well, the stock market has collapsed at times more than it collapsed in 1929, and not in 3 years or 4 years, because the stock market movements then were 1929 to 1933. We've seen that in a matter of weeks, not years. The volatility will continue. But apart from that, the collapse in this current quarter, the spring of this year, in many economies, 20, 30, 40% GDP contraction in 3 months, of course explains why for the full year, the Eurozone will be -7 or 8%. America will be minus something. But let's leave the figures aside. We're looking at a situation where those who say there'll be a V-curve recovery and everything will return to normal quickly, people who are ignorant, like the President of the United States say that. Those people who are either manipulative or ignorant or hopeful, I think are wrong. I think we'll see at best a U-curve, maybe an L-curve, a long period of time. There might be an initial rush to consumption when people think they can come out of the house for the first time, and that might last a few days or weeks. But let's talk about the reality of the shift, this epochal change I see in society, economy, and our life. My belief is that post-COVID, there will be no return to what we knew before. There will be a new set of normals. Let me give some examples. Yeah. You will not fill baseball or football stadiums with 50,000 or 20,000 people hunched together anytime soon. People will be afraid of that, or governments will say that's not allowed. And if you do social distancing in a football stadium, then a football stadium that seats 20,000 people, and to be economic in business terms needs to have 20,000 people, will probably have 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people and won't be able to be economic. So you'll be reduced to streaming the football games. Yes. And that will help the Netflixes of this world and the pay TV people. And that industry will change, sport will change. I could go on and give you examples of music or cinema. I could give you examples of the restaurant business. Will we really want, like Donald Trump said, I want to see 150 people crammed back together in a restaurant in a matter of weeks, said Trump on television in the last few days, among the many, while he was cutting funding to the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes, exactly.
Things won't return. What are the implications of that? That everything will change in the way we work, live, play, learn. It'll all change. And there will be a terrible depression and probably a second wave of COVID until the vaccine is found in 2021, we hope. And then until 2022, because just because you have a vaccine doesn't mean you're going to inoculate 50, 60, or 70% of your population. That takes time. And the populists on the right wing, those no-vax people, will be back saying, no, don't vaccinate, herd immunity. And we saw what herd immunity did for Boris Johnson.
Exactly.
Anyway, things will change. Let me stop there because I've already talked too much.
Yeah, no. I think you touched on so many very vital issues. And let's kind of start to drill a bit deeper. And my big question mark in this entire crisis is, of course, the crisis management, the preparedness of our government, the preparedness of our healthcare system. Do you think our leadership has already failed us before COVID hit?
I think you cannot generalize about that. I think you have to look at it country by country. If you're talking about political leadership as opposed to business leadership.
Political.
In terms of political leadership, I think the single most prepared, most disciplined, most successful, most effective, most brilliant leadership I've seen came from Angela Merkel of Germany in the world. Mm-hmm. I think Merkel and Germany, they began the testing, they were stocked up in January, they didn't wait, they were quiet about it, they got on with it, and I think we see the results today. I think in China, we clearly had the problem of a brutal dictatorship where President Xi didn't want and still doesn't want the real numbers to come out because they cannot be as low as we've seen. But at the end of the day, a dictatorship in China, because they eventually did the right thing, helped them to have the discipline to save lives, but not the best example. South Korea, great leadership, contact tracing, intelligent application of technology. Again, Big Brother Orwellian tactics, tracing your phones and all that. But at the end of the day, anybody who thinks that by using Google or Facebook or even this connection we're on right now, is secure is probably smoking something, because at the end of the day, I'm sure the intelligence agencies have cooperation agreements with Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else. Anyway.
And then that brings me to intelligence service. I mean, there is word out.
Can I just finish on the leadership front? One last point. Who are the poorest leaders who are least prepared? Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. Let's not deal with Boris Johnson because he's more of a buffoon than a crook. Let's deal with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, as the New York Times has shown, as all the evidence shows, really, Obama in 2014, 15, 16, Obama prepared for pandemics, created a White House pandemic unit, funded things, made public speeches warning about it. And of course, as soon as Trump came to the White House, he fired the scientists, closed down everything. And of course, in this world where 90% of people don't really know how to distinguish between fake news and truth, Trump is able to go on television every day and say, Obama left me unprepared. He didn't make enough masks, and he didn't have enough ventilators ready for this, and he didn't have enough testing kits.
Yep.
And he doesn't explain to the American people that you couldn't create testing kits for COVID before COVID existed. But people believe that. So we're in a post-truth reality, and that's a bad thing. So who gets the prize for the worst leadership? I think everybody knows the answer.
And I think today you sent out a tweet, Alan, describing him in Italian, and bear with me for the translation, as incredibly incompetent as a president can get.
I said monstrously.
Monstrously, even worse, monstrously, mostruosamente in Italian, and that as a reaction that he cut the WHO funding. Now, what does it do in terms of anybody watching the political scene, and also, let's say, the poll numbers towards Donald Trump and the elections? I wonder whether this kind of move, where everybody, from whoever is in Midland America to the most sophisticated, busier, business-driven sides of America, is it going to shift a little bit the image in his ratings when he pulls the financial plug on the WHO?
You know, Patricia, it's hard to say. The official poll numbers would suggest that Joe Biden is 10% higher than Trump across the board. But the same poll numbers show that, I would put aside the polls. I got it wrong in 2016. I said Brexit won't happen. I was wrong. Yeah. I got it wrong in November 2016. I said the polls have a 3 or 4% margin in favor of Hillary. I can't believe that Trump will be elected. That was wishful thinking. I got it wrong. You have to admit when you're wrong in life. Today, I'm too traumatized by my past mistakes about polling to say that what I would have said then as a New York Times reader or a member of the intelligentsia. I can't say today, well, logically speaking, with the performance and the blood on his hands and the stupidity and incompetence he's showing, that would suggest, logically, Patricia, that Trump is going to lose. Because logic may not be relevant in a post-truth world where Russian disinformation and fake news is all over the place. So, I mean, who could have ever predicted that Trump would still retain 45 or 50% of the American political support?
Yeah.
That in the middle of a COVID pandemic, Trump supporters are photographed and shown on video on television, running down the highways in Alabama, shouting, "I won't get the virus because I have the blood of Jesus on my skin." So we're in a different world. And would I like Trump to be defeated? Of course. Do I think that Biden will win? Logically speaking, he should. Do I think that's a given? No.
So what would the American voter in a few months' time be judging Trump by?
This is the point. That's a good question. What really could happen, I mean, I don't want to sound like Cassandra, but since I believe that there will be another $1 or $2 trillion of money coming on top of the first 2 trillion, 2.5 trillion, I believe that one of the intelligent things that Trump could do to help him win re-election It's not what he's doing now, which is a complete mismanagement of the crisis and opening up America too soon and risking a second peak. But he could time tax cuts and another $1 trillion. And remember, on the current stimulus, he's delayed Americans getting their emergency money for a few weeks because he had the US Treasury insist that he had to have his name on the checks to go to American citizens.
Wow.
Sounds funny, but it's not funny. But I think he can time another $1 trillion around September, October, just before the election. Take any anecdotal or statistical evidence of a seeming recovery and try to use that and probably convince enough stupid and ignorant Americans to vote for him and potentially get back to a 50-50 position with Biden through that manipulation in the autumn.
I think this is a really interesting point you're making, because a lot of analysts, after Trump was elected the first time around, they actually said it was because he was judged on the economy. Now, you know, the economy is always something inherited, like Angela Merkel inherited the recovery process from Gerhard Schröder in Germany. Same sort of spiel you could argue, of course, for the American case. And every time I see the markets rallying up in a world that we are talking about, the greatest depression since, or the greatest recession since the last depression, I'm just going, what is going on? But of course, if this is what Americans literally will feel in their pockets, they may use that to judge him. So I think what you're saying in terms of his strategy to pump money into the economy, creating a totally different problem.
That economic boost in the autumn, creating a new problem for the future, which Trump doesn't worry about, plus Trump's ability to lie, steal, cheat, use Putin's disinformation campaign, collaborate again, collude with the Russians again, and all the many things that Donald Trump is known for.
Okay, then let's move over to Europe. And I wonder to what extent this crisis, and staying with politics, this crisis distinguishes clear leadership, and you refer to Angela Merkel as being the most apt, the you know, in terms of
best.
Yes, exactly, doing a good job. But I wonder, what does it do to Europe? Is Europe in itself, is it more fragile? Is it going to collaborate more, which does not necessarily seem to be the case? Or do you think it actually will fraction off even more people? Looking also at Conte in Italy, already saying, well, you know, we can exit. If you don't help us, if we don't get Euro bonds or Corona bonds, then, you know, we are not interested in Europe because we don't get your support. How do you stand there?
Well, first of all, let me put my cards on the table. I may be born in America, but I am a pro-European in my heart and in my mind. And my belief is that Europe's unity is at risk because of the COVID crisis. Because I live between America and Switzerland and Italy, I go back and forth among 3 or 4 countries. I feel and see the different sensibilities. It's clear that in Spain and Italy and Southern Europe, the lingering resentment against the mistaken policies of over austerity in the past are a key factor. Remember, the Italian economy, even today, pre-COVID, was still 4 or 5% below its 2007 level because of the lost decade after the crisis. So, and think about Southern European millennials and Generation Z, young people who are, whose lives are marked by living through 2 crises like this,
yes,
each takes 10 years or more to get back from. So that means that half of the lives of young people today will have been colored by crisis. That's a traumatic thing. It's also part of a deindustrialization, a post-industrialization, a technology shift. So there's a lot of factors at play here that will change politics. Clearly, the number one thing we need to focus on if we want to understand Europe's pluses and minuses is the rise of the populists. In my last book, I spent a lot of energy trying to explain that the roots of the right-wing populists, whether it's the AfD in Germany or Le Pen in France or Salvini in Germany or Boris Johnson's friends in Britain,
yeah,
the Brexiteers, the dishonest right-wing, often racist, anti-immigrant populists. Well, in Dutch, I shouldn't forget the Dutch, Geert Wilders, and there's many, or Orban in Hungary, I could cite many examples.
in France.
Yeah, they thrive when there's economic crisis. And throughout history, extremist populist movements grow after financial trauma or war. So I fully expect that after the COVID crisis is over, we're going to see, ironically, more anti-European sentiment coming from more right-wing populists in more countries, including Germany, irrespective of what Europe does, because they don't base themselves on facts or honesty, but on manipulation of facts and honesty. That's point one. Point two, coming back to today, spring, summer 2020, how does Europe get its act together? Well, the little program for sure, I say little because it's 100 billion euros to help out of work people. Nice little gesture, 100 billion for 27 economies. Okay. Yes. The use of the exchange rate mechanism, ERS. Mm-hmm. Good, but if there's no conditionality allowed only for health and virus issues, that's good because it addresses emergency needs. I applaud that. But in Italy, you've got a government where the prime minister, of course, was in bed with Salvini and the anti-European populists who are still half of the Italian government. Remember, the Italian government today is this strange coalition of half of them are wacky anti-European, pro-Putin populists from the comedian party, the five-star party founded by the former comedian. Half of them are reasonable center-left social democrats. So the social democrats are being held hostage by the populists in the way that in Germany, if there weren't so many, xenophobic populists, maybe Angela Merkel would allow Euro bonds, but there are too many in domestic terms because every politician has to address domestic issues. It's true in Switzerland with Blocher's right-wingers. It's true in France with Macron being often hobbled. It's true everywhere. So is Europe doing the right thing? Yes. Is the history of Europe, one step forward, two steps back? Yes. Do I still have faith in the European project? Yes. What is the big test coming up later in April, coming up now? The big test is if there's going to be another 500 billion euro recovery fund. I don't care if you don't call it Eurobonds. I don't care if it isn't the mutualization of debt, which I understand. People in Southern Europe say, why shouldn't you save me? You're rich and I'm poor. And people in Northern Europe say, why should I save you if my taxpayers don't want to pay your problems because you're a bunch of drunks with the mafia, which is unfair. And then you get racism and populism between the two, and the Italians call the Germans Nazis, and the Germans call the Italians mafiosi.
And nothing has changed since the 70s, as such.
Unfortunately. Yes. The truth, however, as Jacques Delors has said, and as Mario Draghi have said, and these are the people I look to when I want to hear what they think, is that Europe has an opportunity to provide solidarity, that the 750 billion euros from the European Central Bank for buying bonds is a good thing. That's what saves Italy's bacon more than anything else, the ECB. That's what should be touted and should be continued and will be continued. There's no way that Christine Lagarde, after her early gaffes, can just say on December 31st, okay, that was QE2, and now it's over from January 1st, 2021. My view, we're looking at the same bond buying by the ECB and eventually the monetization of debt.
Yes.
Over the next 3 to 5 years, at least, even if it's not formally announced. So does Europe have a chance to come together? Yes. Will the European Recovery Fund be an answer? Possibly.
Well, and again, I think Mario Draghi is actually, in my mind, the true European leader, because until now, whatever crisis we have faced, it was always the central bank, the Central European Bank, that helped, and then in hindsight, when things started getting better, started to mop up basically what was there of additional or too much liquidity in the market. And I wonder, is it really the role of a central bank like the Fed as well to regulate, even during times that are not necessarily crisis. Because let's face it, Alan, I get the feeling that the Fed, the ECB, yes, they still have a little bit room to move and to fine tune, but they're quite out of money. We are negative rates. I mean, I don't have to repeat it to you, that there is the scope might be limited.
Yes, they have, because negative interest rates is not the answer anymore. You can't go much beyond where you are. No, I think that the real point now that my takeaway from Mario Draghi's article in the Financial Times, which is the seminal think piece for our generation on what to do to save Europe, and that's a big statement, I know. Mario Draghi's argument is we need to understand that we're in a war. Debt levels will be permanently higher over time. We will get used to Italy having 150, 160% debt level, and France and Germany will come up toward higher debt levels as well. And that's going to be a new nature of the market. And here's the strange thing about the psychology of financial markets and institutions over time. Remember that the 3% Maastricht deficit to GDP rule was not designed by economists, but by politicians. And it is not a magic formula that 3%, it's a guideline. And it could have been 4% or 2% or 5%. It was plunked down there. So strangely enough, if you want me to think out of the box, here's what I think. I think the same Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch's who would have destroyed Italy's credit rating and sent the spread soaring to the skies if they saw the debt to GDP ratio jumping from 135 to 145% 6 months ago, now we're going to accept that 150 to 160% is normal. There'll be a new normal. And the European Central Bank will print money. They'll do it in the most polite and elegant manner. They'll launch QE2, this LTRO, this TTP, this variation.
Financial regulations might be a bit loose.
At the end of the day, we're talking about bailing out the private sector as well as governments who run up their debts and can't pay them back by printing money, but not as the lender of last resort. Clinked.
No, it's first. No.
Horrible. No, you can't say that. What you say is we are going to use more asymmetric tools. And that's the way it has to be. And that's the way I think it will be. And that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, the European Central Bank and the Fed are the only institutions, really, and the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England, if we want to include the other big boys, are the only and the Chinese, are the only institutions who can do that. And they're more effective than the European Commission or the US Treasury or anybody, because they can do that. And I think that's where we're going, because we're in a Great Depression worse than 1929. It's gonna last for a long time. There'll be waves of this over the next 2 to 3 years. It'll be 2022, 2023 before life even returns to something else. And that won't be back to normal. That'll be some kind of a mix between what we remember as being normal and a leap into the future. That's where we're going.
Exactly. And just to finish off on exactly that, give us your scenario. You hinted at it at the beginning of our conversation, Alan, where you just said, okay, there's going to be a new normal, and really almost every aspect, if not every aspect of our daily lives is going to be impacted, from sport to travel to leisure in general, from the way we work, from the way we are being schooled. What do you think are the 3 most seismic shifts we will have to deal with, perhaps even beyond having a vaccine in 21 or 22? What do you think?
Those are very big questions and complex matters, and I don't have a pithy soundbite, and I don't claim to have an answer of being able to say what those 3 things are. I could cite examples like there'll be shifts in consumer practices, B2C, throughout the world. But that's kind of obvious. Restaurants probably won't be crammed together anymore. There'll be new designs. I could say, and it would seem trite and cliched and obvious, that of the 100% of the people who are smart working from home today, I don't think they'll all return to the office after this is over. Maybe half of them, maybe 2/3 of them, but a good third, I think, will become structural smart working in future. I could say the nature of society will change so much that there'll be a shift in the curriculum of universities to different subjects, and there'll be all of that. But because this is such a vast subject and because it needs to be studied, I'm contemplating some initiatives that will bring together thinkers to do this. And I believe we need to do that because I believe people need to think about what will happen after the immediate. And for me, the immediate is the next 24 months.
Yeah.
We're still not projecting beyond that. But I'll give you an example. Sustainability. I'm committed, I've always been committed to sustainability. Big subject of mine. Very abused word, used by marketing people. Terrible word. The right word. The smart people know it has ESG, environment, social governance in it. The ignorant people think, oh, let's call our next product sustainable and sell it. That word is already obsolete in the new world. Already a subset of something different, which we don't know yet.
Yeah.
I'll close this, hopefully not too rambling set of stream of consciousness ideas by putting it this way. We have a chance of achieving more meritocracy and more social equity and less income disparities after this crisis than before. Why? I'll just say it this way. Each one of us, whether we're a company or a person, are going to need to reinvent ourselves in the way we live and work and play and learn. And that means we're all startups. And I don't want to sound too sentimental. I like to think I'm cynical, but let me say this. There's maybe a chance, a small chance, that while on the one hand, as I said, the bad guy, extremist, racist, anti-immigrant populist could get elected in a number of countries after this, there's also a chance that on the other side of the equation, we might come to treasure the sanctity of human life, friends and family, and the fact that the simpler things in life are more important than we realized. And we might begin to realize, I hope in some parts of Europe, that actually we're all related. We're all family.
Yeah, and I think this is such a fundamental, hopefully, shift in what our values are going forward, that this crisis is really a chance of rebooting. And one of the very first words you said this at the beginning of our talk, Alan, was humanity. And I think, when I think about the concept of humanity, somehow humanity is, of course, saving lives. But doesn't it already start a lot earlier? And there I'm referring again to perhaps we can reboot the funding of our healthcare system. Why are we in a state that we need to have that trade-off between lives and livelihoods simply because our healthcare system was efficient rather than perhaps a little bit obsolete, but when a crisis hit, whenever that would be, we might not have this kind of trade-off. And I wonder whether humanity doesn't start a lot earlier in already how you fund, how you run the values, be it on a country level, be it on your private level, on your family level.
Well, the answer is we'll find out.
Alan, thank you so much for your time. We will find out indeed. And I think what is fundamental is not only finding out, but trying to participate. And with every one of us, the way we think, the way we act, perhaps the way we change our actions and our decisions will create indeed a good new normal going forward. Alan, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.